Chapter 18. Last Light Before the Night. Hundreds of voices began to grow slowly, cutting through the quiet and the dark. Kai wasn't sure who the voices belonged to, but they seemed to all be talking at once. Kai instantly focused on two voices he recognized. Arden and Marine's words cut through the noise. "You think you can mend the wound?" "I have stopped the bleeding, but for mending it completely, I'm not sure. It is too soon to tell." Kai opened his eyes, now staring up at the glass ceiling of the great hall. The sun had risen, and a cloudy sky rained soft snowflakes that hit the glass, coating it in a blanket of white. He became aware he was lying on a bedroll, with people and voices all around him. Turning, he saw that the great hall had been made into a makeshift infirmary, with hundreds of people tending to wounded lying on bedrolls spread throughout the room. Sick beds were laid out all over for the injured, with healers rushing from one to another. Acolytes were tending to their masters and reinforcing defenses around the castle. Kai could hear crying and shouts of pain. He could smell blood and herbs in the air. He saw a goblin mage sitting directly across from him on the opposite wall, shaking, both his eyes gouged out. A healer was bandaging his head. Kai was in a daze, looking at the horrific scene around him. Arden's face faded into his view as he realized Kai was awake. "Hey, kid." Kai slowly began to lift himself up off the bedroll into a sitting position. He noticed the wound to his shoulder was fully healed, but that his left leg was completely wrapped in bandages, and 2 strips of wood were secured on either side of it, bracing it. "It's important not to move your leg as the blood flow returns," Marine stated as Kai observed the injury. "It will take time and several more treatments to find out if the damage is permanent." "Permanent?" The statement gnawed at Kai, as did the very real fear that he could lose his leg. Of course, considering how bad the wound had been, he guessed he really shouldn't be surprised. No sooner had Marine finished tending to Kai's injury than another acolyte rushed over and whispered, "Lady Marine, you are needed." Marine nodded. She gave Kai a slight smile. "I will be back to check on you," she assured him before rushing off. Kai didn't get a chance to thank her for her help. Once Marine was gone, Kai turned back to Arden. "The stone? Your cohorts were able to get it to me and told me how to get to you." Arden reached into his pocket and pulled out Saya's bracelet, handing it to Kai. He turned over the bracelet in his hands, inspecting the gems and the shard of the wayfinding stone. Such a gift had saved his life more than once. He owed Saya the world. "The shades?" "The maesters had the majority of them on the retreat when I left. It seemed they were meant to serve as nothing more than a distraction." "Were there casualties?" Arden nodded quietly. Kai fell silent. All of this destruction, all this death, just to get to the stone? It didn't matter why he wanted it. If Orin was willing to go to such extremes to get it, they had to keep it from him at all costs. It can't be for nothing. Orin can't get the stone, no matter what. "He won't get the stone," Arden stated before looking Kai straight in the eye and adding, "We will make sure of it." Kai noted he was included. He nodded at his master in determination. Moments later, 2 more acolytes approached Arden, giving him a deep bow. "Apologies, Lord Arden, but Lord Fyron has chased several shades into a cave in the northwest province. He's asking for assistance in clearing them." Arden paused for a moment in hesitation before turning to Kai. Kai looked back and said, "Promise I won't go far." Arden grinned. "You know, I somehow believe that this time." He put a hand on Kai's shoulder and added, "Rest up. I'll be back in a bit." Kai nodded as Arden rushed off with the acolytes. He let out a deep sigh and ran his hand over his face, thinking over the events of the night. He looked at his hands. Umbri's blood no longer stained his palms, but he felt as though there were still traces of it on his skin, like a curse mark he couldn't get rid of. Kai shut his eyes tight and forced the thought from his mind. He felt numb and drained. He was about to lie back on his bedroll when a familiar voice caught his ears, causing him to immediately sit up. "What? No, I'm not drinking that. It smells like shit." "Oh, gods, it tastes like shit too." "It's not meant to be a cocktail, Riley." Kai instantly began searching the crowd. There, on the north wall of the atrium, were Saya and Riley. Riley was seated on a bedroll with bandages on his right side. Saya stood beside him as an acolyte attempted to hand him what Kai supposed was a healing potion, one which he seemed adamantly against taking. Kai smiled widely. He felt a rush of relief that they were both all right. As he was looking on them fondly, Saya turned and caught sight of him across the great hall. She froze in surprise as their eyes met. She silently mouthed his name. It happened in an instant. Saya bolted the distance of the great hall toward him and dropped to her knees on Kai's right side, wrapping her arms around his neck, pulling him into her. Kai's breath caught for a moment in surprise, mainly because he honestly couldn't remember the last time someone had hugged him. It was a forgotten experience, but one he could get lost in. Kai returned the embrace, wrapping his arms around Saya's waist and pulling her close. Already he could hear the whispers around the great hall, the scandal of a human hugging an elf, but Kai closed his eyes and tuned them out, taking a moment to revel in the warmth of lilac and lavender. "You're all right," Saya whispered. Kai nodded as they slowly broke their contact. He felt the loss of her warmth instantly. "I am, thanks to you." He reached in his pocket and pulled out Saya's charm bracelet. He wrapped the bracelet around her wrist and secured the clasp, returning the precious heirloom back to its proper place. Saya looked down at the bracelet and back at Kai. Their eyes connected in silence for several moments, as the great hall around them almost seemed to grow quiet. Kai and Saya's gaze were so focused on each other, they didn't notice Riley approach. "Hey, look who's still in one piece." "Well, sort of," Riley remarked. He took a seat against the wall on Kai's left side. Their connection instantly broke as Kai turned his attention toward Riley, and Saya took a seat against the wall on Kai's right side. "You're looking a little worse for wear yourself." Riley waved his hand nonchalantly. "This? They're just scratches. Those shades definitely got the worst of it." Riley looked down at Kai's leg before asking, "Umbri?" Kai shook his head. "Dead." "Good. Be sure to show me where he's buried so I can piss on the fucker's grave." Kai fell silent. Wishing Umbri dead was one thing. Being responsible for causing it was another. He had never killed anyone before, and honestly, he didn't know how to feel about it. Thankfully, Riley changed the topic. "So, how's the leg?" Attached. So that's an improvement." Riley cringed a bit at Kai's injury. Saya cast a look of concern as well. The pair seemed uncertain what to say. You know, on the bright side, with shift kind, it's a sign of respect," Riley added after several minutes. Kai turned toward him. "Really?" Riley nodded. "Oh yeah, it's a sign of a warrior. In fact, in the Shifter clan, the more injuries and scars you have, the greater your social standing." "Huh. Then I would probably be nobility by this point." Saya chuckled as Riley playfully nudged him in the side. "Now you're getting it? All hail Kai, king of the humans." Kai smiled back at his friends, appreciative of their attempts to cheer him up. He leaned back against the wall as Riley and Saya began to relay their epic fight with the Shades. As he listened, Kai was hit with a realization that had taken him far too long to grasp. Arden, Saya, Riley, even Celeste and Marine. He had friends. People who cared about him as much as he cared about them. In the cave with Umbri, he had been certain he was on his own as he had been for most of his life. But he now knew, without a doubt, he wasn't alone anymore. Amon approached the snow-covered orc tavern. His master had elected this meeting place specifically because it was out of the way and deep in the mountains of orc territory. For the most part, mages and other races tried their best not to mess with orcs, and for good reason. They were short-tempered, irrational, and prone to fits of anger. Not to mention they were massive and difficult to kill. All in all, Amon considered them worse than animals, with no redeeming qualities. As he approached, Amon noticed the unnatural silence emanating from the building, which was unusual considering orcs were known for being boorish and loud. The reason for the lack of sound became apparent as Amon reached for the tavern door and was hit with the smell of death. He slowly opened the door to the gruesome scene before him. 25 orcs lay dead, spread over various tables and on the floor. It had been a few days since they died, by the stench of decay that met Amon's nose. This was not fresh meat. Fluids had started to leak from the corpses out onto the tavern floor, adding offense to the aroma. Amongst the decay, Amon noticed only one living person. His master had stationed himself at a table in the back, calmly sipping beer from a stein and watching the snowfall outside. He was unbothered by the death and decay around him, existing without remorse, only purpose. Amon had never known one of his shifter kind to exhibit even a fraction of such a killer instinct, a true hunter, worthy of respect. As Amon approached the table, Orin seemed to finally grant him his attention.
"Ah, Amon, good to see you, my friend. Would you care for a drink?"
Amon raised his eyebrows, feeling there were probably better places to enjoy a drink. "What the hell happened here?" Amon asked, to which Orin waved his hand dismissively.
A minor skirmish."
"Minor?" Amon questioned. It was fairly clear to see whatever had happened had not been minor. Orin merely sighed.
"I know what you're thinking, Amon, but I am not the one who started this escapade. Merely the one to resolve it."
"You call this a resolution?" Amon asked, in which Orin nodded.
"Indeed, a swift one."
Now it was Amon's turn to sigh. "Master, I'm sure you had cause, but you were the one to stipulate we were not ready for a direct confrontation with the mages. We were supposed to be keeping a low profile."
Orin smiled and nodded. "I understand, and your concerns are quite valid. Do not worry. I intend to clean up after myself."
Orin gestured to the other seat at his table as Amon sat down.
"Now tell me, was Umbree's information about another creation stone correct?"
Amon reached into a pack attached to his back and pulled out an item wrapped in cloth. "Turns out he was actually useful for something," Amon stated as he handed the cloth to his master. Orin's eyes were bright as he unwrapped it, producing a short, ostentatious scepter. It was glistening gold, jewels lining every inch of it, but Orin's focus was on the jewel at the top, a bright red ruby, about the size of a fist, glowing slightly.
"Oh, yes. His last act was bestowing on me such a wonderful gift."
Orin held the scepter up against the tavern wall. In a flash, a fire sparked along it. Moving like water, it coated the walls and the floor and ignited the corpses on the floor. The smell of burning meat and hair invaded the senses. It was mere moments before Orin and Amon were sitting in an inferno, unmoved and unafraid.
"After all,"
Orin stated, admiring the scepter in his hand, a cruel smile spreading on his face.
"I've always loved to play with fire."
In the weeks that followed, spring had finally begun to melt the last of the winter snow surrounding the castle of Caelum Vallis. Kai sat out on the veranda in Arden's tower, reading a tome on the first warm day in a while. It was close to sunset, with the light slowly dimming on the horizon. The one thing he had learned about Iselia was that he better enjoy the warm weather when it came, for it was guaranteed it would not last for long. The trees had just started sprouting leaves, signaling the beginning of longer days. Kai found it hard to believe it was almost this time a year ago he became Arden's acolyte. From a slave on Helia to a mage of the High Council. He had never imagined his life would take such a turn. Kai shifted in his chair as an unexpected pain shot through his left leg. The warm weather seemed to help with his injury, but he knew this was something he would have to get used to. In the time that followed Umbri's attack, the serious wound on his leg had miraculously healed. It was all thanks to Marine's skill. She had been able to save his leg. But the damage had been so extensive, she had told Kai there were limits to her ability to mend it. He would probably walk with a limp for the rest of his days. Kai was simply grateful to be able to keep his leg. Consequences be damned. Arden had been surprised about Kai's recovery as well. When he heard from Marine that he would make close to a complete recovery, he told Kai he was, quote, one lucky son of a bitch. While he'd been stuck in the infirmary, it wasn't just Arden who had checked in on him. Celeste would often appear with soups and desserts, which she insisted would help with a speedy recuperation. Saya and Riley had come to visit every day, bringing him books and chatting with him. Kai was definitely appreciative of the company, especially as cabin fever began to set in close to the end of his several-week-long stay. Now that he was released, Kai immediately dove back into his studies. If his fight with Umbri had taught him anything, it was that he still had a long way to go as a mage. And now, with the injury to his leg, he felt as though he needed to compensate for his already lacking abilities. Here you are, Arden stated to Kai as he walked out onto the veranda. I thought you might be in the library. Kai turned toward him and shrugged. Normally I would be, but I figured I'd take advantage of the weather. Arden nodded in agreement as he pulled up a chair. He had just returned from a High Council meeting to give an update on the Creation Stone. Since the attack, Arden had hidden the stone far outside the castle, where no one but him could find it. Kai wasn't even sure it was still in Iselia, and didn't think it was safe for him to ask either. Considering how close Umbri had come to getting the information, he felt his knowing the hiding place was more of a liability than a help. It was still unknown how Umbri had been able to sneak inside the castle when the maesters were gone, but both Arden and Kai suspected he had help from within the council itself, which meant they had to be careful who they trusted. How was the council meeting? Following Orin's attack, the council had been in disarray. 28 maesters had lost their lives to the shades Orin had unleashed upon Iselia, not to mention several hundred citizens. It had shone a glaring light on the deficiencies of the High Council and their need to prepare for battle. Simply, gone were the days of galas, now was a time of war. Well, you will be happy to know the Council has officially cleared you of all suspicion in the events on Helia and of the charge of attacking Umbri. I feel so relieved, Kai answered, not even attempting to hide his sarcasm. Yeah, even Vala himself added that he may have been mistaken about Umbri. Kai leaned forward in his chair. May have been mistaken? He cried incredulously. Make note of it, kid, 'cause it's the closest Vala will ever get to a fucking apology. Kai shook his head in disbelief as Arden pulled out his pipe and lit the end. Honestly, I think the council is just relieved that Umbri is dead. A bit of an embarrassment for them to have a morally corrupt murderer as a former colleague. Kai turned away and nodded. He had not really talked about Umbri since he died. Mainly because of how he felt about the fact that he had been the one to kill him. Arden took note of Kai's sudden silence. You okay? Yeah, I'm fine, Kai replied, but Arden caught him under a focused gaze. But? Kai froze for a moment, running a hand through his hair and trying to think of how best to explain. I don't know. Umbri was an evil, heartless bastard. He tried to kill you. He almost killed me, and who knows how many deaths he is responsible for. He deserved to die, but... But you feel guilty about killing him? Kai turned away. How pathetic was he? To his complete and utter surprise, though, Arden simply responded, "Good." Kai stared back in confusion. Good? It's not supposed to be easy to kill, Kai. The fact you feel guilty about it is just proof you have a conscience, and that's not something to be ashamed of. Kai fell silent. Umbri had caused so much destruction, all out of his desperation to stay alive, and it was that desperation that had ended up being the death of him. Just for the hope of immortality? Is it possible to gain immortality through magic? Arden gave Kai a serious glare. It's what Umbri said that Orin promised him. He said Orin was immortal, that he had lived far beyond the lifespan of a normal elf, and that he could grant that immortality to him. Arden shrugged. Well, then it sounds like Orin is full of shit, but I guess that depends on your definition of immortal. Kai turned to Arden, surprised. He had thought immortality in any form was impossible. Arden took a long pull from his pipe before he began. A long time ago, there was a goblin mage named Frelick who sought to live forever. After spending most of his life searching for a way, he finally found a solution. He crafted a golem in his image, was able to separate his soul from his living body, and attach it to the stone golem. Well, it worked. His thoughts were still intact, and he was technically immortal. He lived for several centuries like that, until one day, out of the blue, he just hurled himself into a volcano. He left behind a piece of paper with just a single sentence written on it. I now only wish it to end. 'Cause you see, what he didn't realize is that while a stone statue doesn't get sick or old or injured, it also doesn't feel anything, doesn't need anything, doesn't want anything. An immortal life trapped within an unfeeling shell. Arden leaned back in his chair before looking back at Kai. So, technically, you could live forever using magic. But I tell you what, it's a living hell I wouldn't wish on my worst enemies. Kai looked back out to the landscape as the sunset painted reds and gold on the horizon. Orin wasn't a soul attached to a stone golem. He was flesh and blood. So why was it that Umbri thought he was immortal? It seemed to Kai that Orin was as capable of dying as any other elf, even if he wasn't afraid of it. Suddenly, Orin's words from the temple popped into his head. Arden? Who is Ain? Arden blew out a puff of smoke. Ain? In the temple, when Orin possessed Umbri, he called me the spawn of Ain. Ah, he must have been talking about the old gods. Old gods? Kai asked, to which Arden nodded as he took another pull from his pipe. Long ago, the realms worshipped gods. Of course, this was before mages started thinking we were ones. The races even built temples in the gods' honor. If I remember correctly, Ain was the goddess of life and light. Story goes, she split her physical body into 6 pieces, which became the 6 realms of all life. Kai had never heard any stories of gods or such beings. It would make sense that Arden knew of them, though, since the elves' history was much longer than that of any other race. But something about Arden's story bothered him. But if Ain literally made the realms, then wouldn't that mean all life in the 6 realms are spawns of Ain? Arden nodded and shrugged. If you believe in the mythos, that is. Kai fell silent, looking out at the sinking sun. He watched the light flash its last gasp before disappearing fully behind the horizon. The darkness followed closely behind. The way that Orin had spoken gave Kai the distinct impression that he did not consider himself a spawn of Ain. But if that was the case, then he wouldn't have come from the 6 realms either. So the question that remained, just who or what was Orin? And where the hell did he come from?